Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Tonight we're back here with Extra History. Here comes part 4 of The Path to Pearl Harbor, called Countdown to War. Been a while since I've done this series, so mine's a little blank, even though I already uploaded the previous parts, so yeah, I'm not sure when the embargo is going to be happening, but maybe here, but we're about to find out. So let's get back to see how the tension is going between the US and Japan. So be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy. Let's check it out.
Honolulu, Hawaii, April 12th, 1941. Tadashi Morimura, the new vice consul at Japan's consulate general in Honolulu, is unusually daring for a civil servant. A private pilot, he rents small aircraft to fly around the island and swims the southern waterways.
Really?
He also visits the geisha bars favored by local Japanese and visiting naval officers, and loves chatting up the girls for gossip. And he lives unusually far away from work, 8 miles to be precise, in a second-floor apartment overlooking Pearl Harbor. Now, if that all sounds odd to you, there's a good reason. Because that identity is a cover. In reality, he's Ensign Takeo Yoshikawa of Imperial Japanese Naval Intelligence, a specialist in U.S. Navy warships. His job is to provide descriptions of the harbor and monitor which vessels are in port. And he reports this information back to Tokyo via diplomatic cables. Cables that, he has no way of knowing, are being read by the American military. The countdown has started.
Guess he wasn't that secretive. Oh boy, he's so fired up.
Thanks so much to NordVPN for helping to keep us safe on the internet. For a 2-year plan on a huge discount, use code ExtraCreditsVPN at nordvpn.com/ExtraCreditsVPN.
Sounds right.
April 13th, 1941. A train station in Moscow. Foreign Minister Matsuoka and the Japanese delegation are in high spirits. They're slapping backs, hugging, many of them a little intoxicated, after a celebration banquet. For half a century, Japan has feared an attack by Russia, but no more. Over the last several months, Matsuoka has been negotiating a non-aggression pact between Japan and the Soviet Union, and today they signed it. And as the conversation on the platform dwindles, Matsuoka turns to see an unbelievable sight. Walking through the crowd is Stalin himself, come to see Matsuoka off.
Really?
This never happens. Stalin doesn't go to the train station to give diplomats a personal farewell. And it's at that moment that Matsuoka feels the weight of history, and how badly the Soviets wanted this arrangement. Now...
So wait, Stalin actually talked to Matsuoka and be like, hey, good job, man. I'm impressed. Like, I'm actually surprised Matsuoka actually got, like, Stalin's apparently personal approval. He shows up to see him off. Like, wow. I gotta say, you did some pretty good job there, Matsuoka, if you was able to decide, you know what, I'm gonna give him a little rub and just be like, good job, man. Anyway.
Stalin can withdraw troops from its border with occupied Manchuria and send them west, and Japan, for its part, could remove their own troops and push south. But when Matsuoka arrives back in Tokyo, he found that plan had become a bit more complicated. For in Washington, Ambassador Nomura had hashed out a draft resolution that could normalize relations with the U.S. If Japan would agree to withdraw troops from China, merge its Chinese puppet state government with Chiang's nationalist government, and pledge to recognize Chinese independence, the United States was prepared to recognize Manchuria as a Japanese possession, normalize trade, and end racially discriminatory immigration laws. And Prime Minister Konoye was considering it. After all, he wanted out of the Chinese quagmire. And, while it might come off as a betrayal of the Japanese soldiers who died in China, it could prevent thousands more from dying in a Pacific-wide conflict. Matsuoka was livid. He insisted that the draft be shown to their German allies, and said that the time to attack British Singapore had come. After all, he'd spent over a year forging diplomatic agreements with Germany and the Soviets to keep the pressure off Japan. And what, now they were just gonna give in? Matsuoka started to go rogue. He made a...
Oh boy. Honestly, if I heard it was either the Soviet Union or the United States, I mean, considering the United States has got themselves a big old military there, I would have been like, you know what? We'll just pull out of China, they'll recognize Manchuria, and we'll just go from there, you know? I mean, hey, if you guys remember from what was simplified, like, if you did thing your Manchuria, we'll let you do your thing, you know? Which, honestly, it was Matsuoka, I would have been like, dang, I think we're getting lucky in the diplomacy department. Like, you got two sides from, like, two, like, different angles of the USSR and the United States willing to negotiate. Like, why not just follow through on both deals? Like, just pull out of the war and just be done. You know, hey, the United States was willing to do it. Just pull out of China and you're done. That's it. You know? That's it. That's all you gotta do. Just pull out, recognize China as independent, and just go from there. But no, but I guess, like you said, Matsuoka about to go rogue, because dang it, I hate the United States or something like that. Oh boy.
Counteroffer, where Japan gave up nothing and started to denigrate Konoye in public. Worse still, once Nazi Germany broke its non-aggression pact and invaded the Soviet Union in late June, he insisted that Japan should abandon the Southern Strike and instead invade the USSR in support. Konoye, deeply embarrassed, had to personally apologize to the emperor for Matsuoka's conduct and give assurances he did not plan to provoke a war with Stalin. In fact, the fiery diplomat's presence had even become a sticking point in negotiations, with Secretary of State Cordell Hull suggesting that talks could not go forward with Matsuoka still in government. He also demanded that Japan quit the tripartite pact. And when Matsuoka started to act without consulting the cabinet, Konoye decided it was time for him to go. So his ministers dissolved the cabinet and reformed it without him. In Washington, Roosevelt and Hull were overjoyed. With Matsuoka out, perhaps this signaled a cooling off of military aggression. Their hope was misplaced. 4 days later, under the threat of military action, Japan had reached an agreement to occupy the southern portion of French Indochina, moving into air bases that would allow them to bomb British Malaya, Singapore, and the Philippines. A hard response was needed, and Roosevelt delivered. He announced he would formally cut relations, put an embargo on goods, and freeze all Japanese assets in the United States, with that last measure cutting all American oil sales to Japan. Yet days later, he gave Nomura a new offer. Pull out of Indochina and make it a neutral territory, and the assets would be unfrozen. See, the U.S. oil embargo wasn't a full embargo. That would leave Roosevelt without much flexibility in negotiations. Japan obtained American oil by buying licenses to purchase a certain volume, and Japan had already obtained enough licenses to keep them supplied until 1943. But that oil had to be paid with U.S. currency, held in American banks, and those were the assets that were frozen. Though, technically, the Treasury Department could decide on a case-by-case basis to allow Japan's license purchases to go through. So Roosevelt could, essentially, loosen or tighten Japan's supply of oil in a carrot-and-stick approach. Nomura didn't even pass on the proposal to Tokyo, knowing that the militarists, especially Minister of War Hideki Tojo, had boxed Prime Minister Konoye in. On August 1st, the economic measures went into effect. Yet Roosevelt's measured approach was not followed. As he took a 2-week diplomatic visit to meet Churchill, the Treasury went hardline and denied all Japanese oil purchases. Then, given the popularity of this tough stance among friendly nations, Roosevelt retroactively endorsed it. What he didn't endorse, however, was coming to those nations' defense. All summer, British and Dutch diplomats had tried to get Roosevelt to commit, even informally, to fight together should Japan attack in Southeast Asia. American diplomats instead ducked, saying negotiations with Japan were ongoing and the time was not right. In truth, Roosevelt was unsure that the isolationist American public would support him going to war, even if Japan attacked. Would American parents, he wondered, accept their sons dying just to hold on to the Philippines or preserve British control of Singapore? At the time, probably not. But
I mean, to be fair, it was a few years, or in this case, decades, since the end of the First War, because, yeah, like, it's still fresh in many people's memories, you know? Which, you gotta think on, Roosevelt's part, it was like, do I really want to drag this back into another war? Like, we just left, and I promised them not to send him in. And, again, none of the U.S. assets have been hit. It's just the European stuff. Like, sure, Japan's part of the Tripart, pact, but they haven't invaded any of our territories yet. So, again, there's not really a point of joining the war. Because, again, American assets hasn't been attacked, well, yet. There's still a few months out, but that's, again, next part. But you have to understand, like, he's getting, like, pressure here where the war has nothing to do with the U.S. It's still a European conflict over there. Well, we're focusing more over here on, the Pacific, because it's a lot more worrisome than over there with the Nazis, I know I'm saying that, but you gotta think things through. And I'm actually here with Roosevelt. Like, I probably wouldn't have done that either. You know? Again, nothing to do with us, so I probably stall too until it does become a problem. Which, I think that's the point. Anyway, moving on.
Roosevelt's attempt at deterring war again did the opposite.
Uh-oh.
Now Japan was on the clock, with over 90% of its oil obtained from the U.S. If war was coming, every day they waited to strike south, they would have less fuel to operate with. Under wartime consumption patterns, they predicted they could only keep their ships moving and planes flying for a year. So, their options now were to either pull out of China, which the army wouldn't accept, or strike south. And yet, American negotiators dawdled. They were in no hurry, each day seeming as if their hand in a potential war grew stronger. Over the next several months, Prime Minister Konoye tried desperately to find a middle ground, including brokering a face-to-face meeting with Roosevelt in Alaska. Meanwhile, the planning for the strike south, with an optional attack on Pearl Harbor, advanced. The plan had gained formal approval as a contingency should negotiations fail, but militarists increasingly found that Emperor Hirohito did in fact favor a diplomatic solution. At a meeting on September 6, 1941, a militarist officer told Hirohito that a war with the United States would be over in 3 months. Not believing this, the emperor pushed back, saying that they'd said the same thing about China. China is big, explained the officer.
So is America.
Bigger than the Pacific, the emperor responded. And he finished the meeting by reading a poem his grandfather, Emperor Meiji, had written on the eve of the Russo-Japanese War. A poem about how the sea linked all nations and should be at peace. But he did give his assent to war if diplomacy failed. And as the weeks dragged on without progress and the Alaska summit looked doubtful, pressures began to mount. And at a conference on September 25th, Minister of War Tojo pushed for an internal deadline. If no diplomatic options were reached by mid-October, Japan must put in motion plans for a military solution. It was agreed. Fleets began to gather and make ready. October 12th, 1941, near Mount Fuji. Konoye has brought the biggest figures in government to his private estate for a last-ditch effort to prevent war. There, he leans on Tojo, saying that he's not confident a war with the United States can be won, and that he's not equipped to lead the country through it. He threatens to resign. He also enlists allies from the Navy, who privately oppose the war and think that defeat is likely, but who are also not brave enough to make their anti-war views known amongst their colleagues. The best he can get from them in the moment is to say that setting a deadline was a mistake, and that they'd asked for imperial approval of the strike too early. Tojo will not budge. The sticking point is what it's always been. The army refuses to pull troops out of China. Not only does Tojo see doing this as betraying the dead, but much of the army's political power is wrapped up in the war. After many contentious hours, the meeting breaks up. And 4 days later, Konoye resigns from his post, and the emperor appoints his successor, Hideki Tojo, who tells Admiral Yamamoto to begin preparing his strike force for war. He, of course, didn't tell them that over the...
Man, poor Konoye. He was just trying to stop the war. Like, he had a sweet deal. Just pull out of China and everything would have been fine. I mean, seriously, was it really worth it just to work with people that were actively fighting a war in Europe? Like, if they knew about the non-aggression pact break between them, and, well, between the Germans and the Russians, I would have been like, hey, wait, what did they happen to us? Like, I'm just saying, if I was told Tojo, like, look, you're war crazy, we gotta pull out, okay? This is not in our favor, we're done. You out. Like, have they just thought of just getting Tojo out of there? Like, seriously, if someone's, like, so adamant of not leaving China, like, seriously, dude, like, Jesus Christ, man. What are you doing? Poor Konoye. He wanted to avoid a war, but just didn't work out. Jeez. You gotta feel bad for the poor guy. Anyway, there's extra history for you guys. Let me know what you guys think of this part. Until next time, like, subscribe for more. See ya.